Hey students, today we're going to be talking about Chapter 30 on the War to End Wars, World War I. Woodrow Wilson would win the 1916 election with a country divided on the war, but elected him to keep the nation out of the war as he had been in recent years. This would unfortunately crumble on March 1st, 1917. Germany would send an insidious message to Mexico from the to form a German-Mexican alliance, enticing Mexico to reclaim their lost lands from the Mexican-American War. This was intercepted by British intelligence from the German Foreign Office and was sent by telegram from Arthur Zimmermann. Where it gets its name is the Zimmermann Note. The Zimmermann Note outlined an alliance with Mexico and the resuming of unrestricted marine warfare, of which Zimmermann reminded Mexico that submarines were defeating Britain as a subtle threat to them. This note would infuriate Americans and would force the hand of Wilson to pen his request for war. Wilson would stand in front of Congress on April 2, 1917 and ask for the declaration of war against Germany. On April 6, 1917, Congress would approve the declaration of war. Wilson would immediately take charge of the moral cause of the war to end all wars. He would propose his 14 points to Congress. Here, Wilson would outline the reduction of arms, abolition of secret treaties, free trade, freedom of the seas, and others. These points would not be received well by territory-hungry nations and isolationist Republicans in Congress. Wilson now needed the full support of the American people for the war. The Committee on Public Information would be created and headed by journalist George Creel. The committee would pump out war propaganda that would display the Germans as savages against the innocents of Europe. The committee would employ about 150,000 workers to distribute this propaganda. Congress would also pass the Espionage Act in 1917 and the Sedition Act of 1918. This was a response to a wave of anti-German fear overtaking the nation. German books, music, and classes were removed from schools and libraries. The two acts would lead to the prosecution of anti-war socialists across the nation and would be challenged in the Supreme Court. The case would find that any language that was a clear and present danger to the nation was not protected under the First Amendment. The war would prove to be a huge toll on the productivity of the economy. Under the leadership of Herbert Hoover, a huge patriotic propaganda campaign was placed into motion. Hoover believed that the American people would voluntarily make personal sacrifices for the sake of the nation, if given the option. Hoover was correct. He would create programs such as Wheatless Wednesdays and Meatless Tuesdays. This would lead to Americans making their own gardens to alleviate the demand on farmers, but farmers during this time would increase productivity by 1/4 to fulfill their patriotic duty. Other agencies would implement similar programs such as Heatless Mondays and Lightless Nights and Gasless Sundays. The Treasury Department would lead parades with slogans like "Halt the Hun" and encourage Americans to buy war bonds to fund the war. This would lead to the sum of $21 billion that would fund 2/3 of the war. The United States had the support of the factories, the farms, the home, but now Uncle Sam needed the men to fight the war. Wilson loathed the draft, but saw no other measure to compel men to fight a foreign war. When he introduced the draft to Congress, there was a fury of voices against the measure, but after weeks of deliberations, Congress approved the draft, but removed any measure that would allow anyone to buy their way out of the war. Men between the ages of 18 and 45 were expected to register. During the first months of the war, the army grew to be over 4 million. Uncle Sam had his men, and the fight to end all wars was to start for America. Well, students, that was the first part of Chapter 30 for this video. We will talk about the labor struggle and women's suffrage when we get back together. Until then, wash your hands, do not touch your face, and stay inside.